I'm Mara Bennett, 31, and I stood under a chandelier that threw cold light across a room where people who share my last name pretended I didn't exist, the air so polished it smelled like lemon and money. My mother's pearls clicked against each other as she wound them tight. My father leaned back like a man waiting to swat a fly, and my brother smirked as if this were brunch. The wall of glass behind the conference table reflected all of us, but it was the only place I saw myself acknowledged. When the attorney cleared his throat and said we were here to honor my grandfather's final wishes, the room fell into a silence that felt practiced. I sat at the end of the table where I'd always been placed out of the way, eyes level, hands still. Outside the doors, heels clicked across marble like distant rain, and somewhere down the hall, a copier hummed steady as a pulse. I came to listen, not to beg, but even I could feel the floor tilt when the envelope with my name was set within reach. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand still while someone tried to write you out of your own life. I was born in a small ranch house that smelled like sawdust and cinnamon, the kind of place where you rinse paintbrushes in the kitchen sink and hang report cards with magnets on a white refrigerator, where work hard and keep your word was the only family motto we needed. My grandfather, Harold Benton, taught me that in a workshop he kept behind his house, a square room lined with hand tools and coffee cans of screws where the radio murmured old country songs and the clock above the door never needed winding. He told me people show you who they are when there's money on the table, but they show you who you are when you walk away without it. My parents preferred country club language, presentation, perception, potential words that hovered like perfume and changed depending on who walked into the room. And once my grandfather's companies turned good years into great ones, our dinners moved from pot roast to catered salmon. The napkins got thicker, the voices got cooler, and the table felt longer than it used to. I learned to be polite in rooms that didn't want me to fold my shoulders small and make space for the stories other people needed to tell about themselves. But I never forgot the knot in my throat the first time my mother corrected the server and introduced me as the artsy one, while she described my brother's real career. When Harold got sick, I visited him in the evenings and read to him from invoices and ledgers because those were the pages that kept his mind clear. He would circle a line with a pen and say, "Facts don't shout, kiddo, they just stand there." I clung to that calm the morning I stepped off the city sidewalk and into Avery & Cole's lobby, every surface polished, every voice hushed, a world built to remind you of what you didn't have if you came from anywhere else. Charles Avery greeted us with the kind of steadiness that has seen too many families not look at each other. His gray suit pressed sharp as a crease in paper, and he asked us to sit while an assistant poured water into glasses that rang like thin bells when they touched the table. My mother folded her hands as if in prayer. My father stared past me into the glass, and my brother pushed his sunglasses onto his head, though we were nowhere near the sun. Nobody said my name. I kept mine to myself and let the chair hold my spine. Charles began with the small bequests, a cabin in the Tetons, a guitar, from the year before my father was born, the old grandfather clock that had ticked through 3 generations of Christmas mornings. Each item landed with a soft thud against expectations that had already been inflated. The room tightened after that, the way air gets heavy before a storm, and for a breath it felt like we were all listening to the same distant thunder. He read my name last. The legal language rolled out of him like a string, pulled smooth, the words "entire financial estate" hanging in the air with the weight of something nobody wanted to catch. My mother's mouth opened and then shut. My father's fingers tapped once against the table, and my brother stopped moving at all. In the window, the city kept going. Taxis threaded the block. Pedestrians lifted collars against a wind they hadn't expected a street vendor right at a stack of pretzels one by one. I felt every set of eyes land on me and pass off as if contact itself might make the words true. I didn't reach for the envelope when Charles slid it closer. I rested my hands flat and listened to the air settle around us, to the quiet scuff of my own breath, to the faint rub of paper against wood as the flap edged toward my side of the table. I had come to witness like my grandfather taught me, and the table where I'd always sat last had just shifted under its own legs. I thought of the workshop again, the smell of cedar and oil, the way Harold would tap a board and say, "Listen to what it tells you before you cut the lesson he gave me, long before anyone imagined lawyers would speak my name in a room like this." I also thought of the Thanksgiving when my parents set 2 extra places because they were courting a partnership, and I carried plates and smiles while my brother explained the future that was already his. Later, when I left to build a life that made sense to me and sent a card instead of an apology, the calls turned into silence, not the kind that heals the other kind. Standing in the firm's quiet, I felt that silence return and then rearrange itself, as if the same empty space could be made into structure if you were patient enough. Charles cleared his throat and weighted the envelope bright against the dark wood, the seal unbroken. I reached forward, and just before my fingers touched the paper, something changed in my father's chair. A tilt of posture, a breath drawn too fast, the kind of tiny sound that means a larger noise is on its way. My father's chair creaked, the sound sharp against the polished quiet. When I looked up, his hand was already moving, fingers reaching across the table, closing around the envelope before I could. Charles Avery's voice cut through the air, measured but firm. "Thomas, that document is addressed to your daughter." But my father didn't stop. He tore through the seal paper, ripping like cloth under tension. My mother leaned forward, eyes bright with something I'd seen before, anticipation dressed as outrage. The check came first. A square of crisp paper that caught the overhead light, heavy enough to mean something. My father held it up like evidence, the numbers bold enough for everyone to see. $99 million. His voice broke on the words as he read them aloud, too loud, his disbelief pouring into the room. My mother's breath caught. Grant's smirk faltered, but he didn't move. For a moment, nobody did. I sat perfectly still, palms flat on the table, my heartbeat steady in my throat. "This is a mistake," my father said, shaking the paper hard enough for the edges to bend. "Your grandfather lost his mind before he died." He turned to me. "You think you deserve this?" After everything, Charles stepped forward, but my father was already reaching into his jacket pocket. When I saw the flash of silver, a chill went through the room. "Dad." The word came out low, almost a whisper. He flipped the lighter open, the small flame catching in the reflection of his glasses. My mother's voice rose behind him, not to stop him, but to cheer him on. "Do it," she said. "Let her see what happens when you walk away from your blood." The flame met the corner of the check, and for one suspended heartbeat, I thought he might reconsider. Then the edge curled, black, thin smoke rising in a twisting thread. Paper turned to ember, then to ash. The scent of burning ink filled the air, sharp chemical final. My father's jaw tightened as the flame climbed higher, and when he dropped the charred remains into a crystal ashtray, he exhaled like a man who'd won. My mother leaned back, satisfied. "Now we're even," she said. Grant laughed under his breath, a low, cruel sound that didn't belong to the brother I remembered. "Guess you should have stayed loyal, sis. Might have had something left." The silence that followed pressed in from all sides. I could feel the heat still radiating from the tray, the faint crackle as what little remained of the check crumbled to dust. My throat burned, but I didn't speak, not because I couldn't, but because I understood what this moment was. My grandfather had warned me people destroy what they can't control. So I smiled, a small, steady smile that seemed to unsettle them more than shouting ever could. My father's face hardened. My mother looked away. Grant frowned, unsure whether I'd lost my mind or found something he couldn't name. "You think this makes you strong?" my father demanded. "That old man ruined this family, and now you're laughing?" I met his stare. "You can't burn what you never owned," I said quietly. His hands balled into fists, the knuckles pale against his skin. Charles finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "That was a legal document, Thomas. You've just destroyed evidence of a will on record." My father's answer was a bitter laugh. "Then she's got nothing left to prove." He shoved back his chair and stood the legs screeching against the marble floor. "This family doesn't owe her a dime." The words echoed through the glass room, bouncing off the walls until they lost their shape. My mother gathered her purse, her pearls glinting in the light. "Come on, Thomas," she said. "We're done here." Grant hesitated, watching me like a man studying a fire he doesn't understand. I didn't look away. I just let him see what calm looked like. When the door closed behind them, Charles sighed, shoulders sinking. The smoke still lingered faint and sour. He met my eyes. "He'll regret that," he said quietly. I nodded once. He already does. I slipped my hand into the pocket of my coat and felt the faint outline of another envelope, the one my grandfather had given me months earlier, the one they didn't know existed. That night I replayed the scene in my mind as I stood by my window, city lights shifting like embers far below. The lighters click the way the paper curled my mother's voice calling it justice. I remembered my grandfather's hand covering mine in his study, his voice rough but calm. "They'll try to destroy what they can't control. Let them. What matters will already be safe." I had thought he was being dramatic, that age had made him suspicious of everyone. But now I understood. The check they burned wasn't the real one. It was a decoy, a false inheritance meant to expose what they'd become. He'd known exactly what they'd do, and I had followed his instructions down to the last detail. The next morning, I returned to the law office. Charles met me in the lobby, surprise flickering across his face. "You don't have to come back today," he said. I handed him a small brass key with a single word engraved along its side, Trillium. His eyes widened slightly. "He told you about that," he murmured. I nodded. He told me everything. We drove to Langford Private Bank on the far end of the city. The building was old but immaculate red brick tall windows and a heavy iron gate that swung open on silent hinges. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and polished stone. A clerk greeted us with quiet respect, leading us down a corridor lined with portraits of men who looked as if they'd never smiled in their lives. At the end of the hall, an older man waited, silver hair, precise posture. "Miss Bennett," he said, offering his hand. "I'm Raymond Cole. Your grandfather trusted me with his final instructions." He guided us into an elevator that sank deep below the street. The air grew cooler as we descended, the hum of machinery fading into silence. When the doors opened, I stepped into a vault lined with brushed steel drawers. Raymond handed me the key, his expression unreadable. "Box 12, he said simply. The lock turned with a soft click. The drawer slid open with the sound of metal sighing against itself. Inside lay a fireproof envelope sealed in red wax, a black velvet pouch, and a folded letter bound with a crimson ribbon. My pulse quickened, but my hand stayed steady. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "If you are reading this, Mara, they've done exactly what I expected. The paper they burned was a decoy. The real legacy lies here untouched and secure, but the money is not your inheritance. What I've given you is control." Beneath the letter was another check, its weight unmistakable. The real one. $99 million written in his bold, looping script. I stared at it, then slid it carefully back into the envelope. My grandfather had never spoken in riddles, but this was a message meant to outlast him. I opened the velvet pouch next. A small flash drive gleamed inside, cool and heavy in my palm. Raymond motioned to a nearby desk where an old laptop waited. I plugged it in, and the screen flickered to life. My grandfather appeared, sitting in his study, sunlight spilling across his worn desk. His voice filled the room, steady, deliberate. "If you're watching this, Mara, it means I'm gone, and it means they've already shown you what they're capable of. You are the only one I trust to finish what I started." I listened, motionless. He spoke about the company, about records he'd hidden, about the quiet power that comes from knowing the truth before anyone else does. Then he smiled faintly. "Let them think they've won," he said. "They can burn paper, but not what's already built in your name." When the video ended, I sat for a long moment staring at the frozen image of him on the screen. The air in the vault felt colder now, heavier. Raymond rested a hand on the edge of the drawer. "He was proud of you," he said softly. I slipped the flash drive into my coat pocket and closed the drawer. "He was ready for them," I answered. "So am I." As we rode back up to the surface, the city lights came into view through the glass doors. Outside, rain had started to fall faint against the windshield like scattered ash. My phone buzzed Grant's name flashing across the screen, but I let it ring until the sound faded. The day before, they had burned what they thought was my future. Tonight, I carried the real one in my pocket, untouched by flame. And though the fight ahead would be harder, I felt the quiet steadiness my grandfather had taught me. The kind that doesn't shout, the kind that waits. When the elevator doors opened, Raymond looked over at me. "What will you do now?" he asked. I met his gaze and smiled faintly. Exactly what he told me to. Then I stepped out into the night, the rain washing the last traces of smoke from the air. When I woke the next morning, the city looked washed out from the rain, the kind of gray that hides the edges of buildings and makes everything feel quieter. I stood at the window for a while watching water slide down the glass. The night before, I had tucked my grandfather's letter, the flash drive, and the real check into a fireproof box inside my closet. Even knowing it was safe, I couldn't shake the echo of the fire from the day before, the smell of burnt ink, the sound of my father's lighter clicking open. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the steam curling up between my hands. My phone buzzed on the counter, and for a long moment, I let it ring. When I finally turned it over, I saw Grant's name glowing on the screen. He hadn't called in years, not once since I left home. Something in my chest tightened as I swiped to answer. "Mara," he said, his voice rough. "We need to talk." The tone was too measured, too rehearsed. About what I asked. "Don't start like that. This isn't about the past. It's about what comes next." I could hear traffic behind him, the faint whir of an engine idling. "Can we meet somewhere? Just us?" I agreed to meet him that evening outside my building. The rest of the day moved slowly, filled with the kind of silence that hums under your skin. When dusk came, the streetlights flickered on, and a thin mist began to rise from the pavement. I saw his car before I saw him. A black sedan pulled up to the curb, headlights cutting through the haze. Grant leaned against the hood arms, crossed his coat collar, turned up. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, but the smirk was still there, faint and familiar. "You look good," he said, trying for casual. "Get to the point," I replied. He laughed once, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't have to be like this. I'm just trying to be reasonable." "Reasonable?" I repeated. "Dad's a mess. Mom won't stop crying. You could end this if you wanted to." "End what?" "This war," he said quietly. "Split it. Half for you, half for us. That's fair." I studied him, the same brother who once taught me how to ride a bike in the driveway, who used to slip extra marshmallows into my cocoa when Mom wasn't looking. Now he stood there, asking for a share of something he never earned. "You really think this is about money?" I asked. "What else would it be about?" His voice rose slightly. "You can't fight them alone, Mara. They'll come for you. You know how Dad gets when he feels cornered?" I took a step closer enough to see the faint tremor in his hands. "I'm not the one who's cornered," I said. He blinked, thrown off balance. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you just proved Grandpa right." Grant's mouth tightened. "What are you talking about? That you'd be the first to show up asking for a deal?" His face paled, the bravado slipping. "Don't twist this. I'm trying to help you." "No," I said softly. "You're trying to help yourself." He didn't answer. A car passed, headlights sweeping across the wet street. The mist thickened, curling around us. For a moment we were the only two people in the world, two sides of the same childhood, now standing in opposite directions. "You should go home," I said. "Tell them whatever story makes you feel better." Grant took a step back, his jaw tight. "You don't understand what you're doing. They won't stop. They'll destroy you." I opened the door to the building, the warm air brushing against my face. "Let them try." The door closed behind me with a soft click, leaving him alone on the sidewalk. Through the glass, I saw him standing there for a moment longer before he turned and walked toward the car. Upstairs, I sat by the window again, watching his taillights disappear into the fog. My reflection stared back, tired but unshaken. I thought of my grandfather's words from the video. "Let them think they've won. They can burn paper, but not what's already built in your name." The following week, Charles called to say my parents had filed a petition contesting the will. He sounded weary, like a man who'd seen too many families do the same dance. "They've hired new counsel," he said. "A young attorney named Whitfield, loud, aggressive, the kind who likes to perform in court." "I'll need someone who doesn't," I replied. He paused, then said, "There's a woman I trust, Patricia Sloan. Quiet, thorough. She used to work with Harold before he retired from the board. I'll arrange a meeting." Patricia met me at a small cafe near the courthouse. She arrived early, her hair pulled back neatly, a stack of folders tucked under her arm. "Your grandfather was a smart man," she said as we shook hands. "He left a trail even the boldest lawyer won't want to follow." We went through the documents in silence, the trust papers, the notarized will, the video recordings stored on the flash drive. When she finished reading, she looked up and said, "This is airtight. They'll try to claim coercion or fraud, but it won't stand. Still, you'll need to stay composed. They'll come at you with emotion when facts don't work." I nodded. "I can handle that." "I believe you can," she said. "Your grandfather's foresight is remarkable. He set everything in motion long before his health declined. It's almost as if he knew the fight would land here." That night, I reviewed every document again, marking details, dates, and signatures. My apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the wall clock. The check rested in the safe untouched, but its weight seemed to fill the room. Outside, rain started again, gentle, steady. I sat back and let the sound cover the silence. My parents were preparing for a battle they thought they could win with noise. What they didn't understand was that my grandfather had already given me the sharpest weapon I could use. The following morning, Patricia called to confirm the court date. "You'll need to testify," she said. "They'll want to paint you as distant, ungrateful, disconnected. Don't respond to the bait." "I won't," I said. After the call, I looked around the apartment at the framed photo of my grandfather in his workshop, his hand steady on a piece of oak. I could almost hear him humming under his breath, the rhythm slow and patient. I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath the same way he used to before he made the first cut of wood. The day of the hearing arrived with clear skies, as if the city had decided to watch from a distance. I stood on the courthouse steps, the marble cold under my handrail. Patricia walked beside me, calm and composed. Inside, I saw my parents sitting at one table, Grant just behind them, his eyes avoiding mine. My father's suit was wrinkled at the sleeves. My mother's pearls gleamed under the lights. They looked smaller than I remembered, the confidence thinned by weeks of planning that had come to this. The judge entered, gavel striking once. "We are here today regarding the estate of Harold Benton," he said. "Let's begin." Their attorney rose first, full of energy and polished phrases, insisting the will I presented was a forgery. Patricia waited until he finished, then stood, her tone calm but certain. "Your Honor," she said, "we have video testimony from Mr. Benton recorded 5 months after the disputed document. We also have bank correspondence and the notarized trust agreement." The judge gestured for the evidence. The screen flickered on. My grandfather's face appeared thinner, older, but unmistakably clear-eyed. "If you're watching this," he said, his voice steady, then my fears were correct. "My son and his wife have pressured me to sign an earlier will I did not want. This is my correction. My granddaughter Mara Bennett is my sole heir." Gasps rippled across the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father slammed his fist once against the table, the sound hollow in the quiet chamber. Patricia continued without hesitation, presenting the correspondence between my parents and my grandfather, emails, urging him to stay on script, threatening to cut off contact if he didn't. The judge's expression darkened as he read. "I've seen greed," he said finally, "but this level of manipulation borders on cruelty." He turned to my parents. "The court affirms Miss Bennett as the rightful heir. The estate will be transferred accordingly." For a moment, nobody moved. My parents sat frozen, Grant staring at the floor. The gavel struck again, sharp and final. The sound echoed through the room like the closing of a door. I exhaled slowly. Patricia gathered the folders, her expression calm. "It's over," she said quietly. I nodded, but inside I knew it wasn't not for them. They would find new ways to fight, new stories to tell. But for now, the truth was written where no one could erase it. Outside, sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. Reporters gathered near the entrance, their voices rising as they saw me. I paused, letting the noise wash past me. My reflection caught in the glass doors, steady, composed, unafraid. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice break sharp and small. My father barked something I couldn't make out. Grant said nothing. I walked forward down the steps, each one carrying me farther from the life they tried to bury in ashes. The city buzzed as always, cars' voices, the rhythm of a place that didn't stop to witness anyone's battles. Yet somehow the air felt lighter, as if the weight had finally shifted. Ahead lay the real challenge, what to do with what he'd left me, and how to carry it without becoming what they were. But that was a thought for another day. For now, I just kept walking the courthouse behind me, fading into the hum of the city. When the courthouse doors closed behind me that morning, the air outside felt cooler, clearer, as if the city had finally taken a deep breath. The gavel's echo still lingered somewhere in my mind. Patricia walked beside me in silence, her briefcase held steady at her side. We reached the bottom of the marble steps, and she stopped watching the cluster of reporters just beyond the barricade. "You don't owe them a word," she said quietly. I nodded, and we turned away from the noise, heading toward the street where the car waited. As the driver pulled into traffic, I looked out the window. The buildings passed in a blur of sunlight and motion glass, stone, and steel. Inside the car, it was quiet. Patricia reviewed the signed documents one last time, her reading glasses slipping down the bridge of her nose. "Everything is in motion," she said, closing the folder. "Within 72 hours, the transfer will be complete. They'll try appeals, but they won't stick." Her tone was calm, matter-of-fact, but there was a flicker of warmth when she looked at me. "Your grandfather would have been proud." I didn't answer. My eyes stayed on the reflection of the city rushing by the faint outline of my face overlaying the skyline. The noise of the crowd faded behind us until only the sound of the tires remained. Later that evening, when I walked into my apartment, the first thing I noticed was the light, the way the sunset bled across the walls, soft and orange. The second was the envelope waiting under my door. My name was written in my mother's handwriting, neat and deliberate. I stood there for a moment, the key still in my hand. Inside, I already knew what it said before I even opened it. The letter was short. Her words were measured, controlled. She wrote that she hoped I was satisfied that the family name meant something once, and that I had ruined it for everyone. She signed it with love, but the word looked strained, like it had been written through clenched teeth. I folded the paper, slid it into the drawer of my desk, and closed it without a sound. For a long time, I sat by the window again, the same seat where I'd watched the rain the week before. The city below moved on as it always did. Cars, lights, people with somewhere to go. I thought of my grandfather's workshop, the hum of the old radio, the smell of cedar and oil. Silence had always been our language. It felt the same now, even from miles away. The next morning, I went to Langford Bank to meet with Raymond Cole. The guard at the front desk recognized me immediately and nodded me through. Raymond was waiting in his office, sunlight spilling across the stacks of papers on his desk. He rose as I entered, his hand warm and firm. "Miss Bennett," he said, "it's good to see you under calmer circumstances." He poured coffee into 2 cups and gestured for me to sit. "Your grandfather set this trust up with remarkable precision," he said, sliding a file toward me. "Everything transfers automatically. Property accounts, shares. Nothing left to contest." He paused, then leaned back slightly. "He also left you a note I was instructed to give only after the ruling was final." He opened a drawer and handed me a sealed envelope marked with the familiar wax crest, the stallion that had once adorned every letter Harold sent. My throat tightened as I traced the edge with my finger before breaking the seal. Inside, a single page in his careful handwriting. "Now that the noise has quieted, use what you've inherited to build something clean. Not another empire, something that breathes. Remember, power means nothing if you don't know peace." I folded the letter and placed it back inside. Raymond didn't ask what it said. He only smiled faintly and said, "He trusted you more than anyone." That afternoon, I walked through the park near my apartment, a quiet stretch of green surrounded by glass towers. Children played near the fountain, their laughter echoing across the water. For the first time in weeks, I felt the air fill my lungs without that familiar tightness in my chest. The court was over, the truth recorded, but the absence of noise felt heavier than the chaos had. When I returned home, a message was waiting on my phone. Grant's number again, this time just a voicemail. His voice sounded small or hoarse. "Mara, I don't know what to say. They're blaming me now. I didn't know it would go this far. I didn't mean for it to." A pause, then softer. "Call me if you want to talk. I'll understand if you don't." I listened once, then again, before deleting it. The next few days passed quietly. Patricia finalized the last of the paperwork, and Raymond arranged the transfer of the trust. I spent hours sorting through the records Harold had left, ledgers, letters, and old photographs that still carried the faint scent of his workshop. In one, I found a photo of the cabin he'd left to Grant. Snow covered the roof smoke curling from the chimney. I remembered visiting it once as a child, sitting by the fire, while my grandfather told us stories about how he built the company from nothing. I wondered if Grant would ever set foot there again. One evening, I found myself walking along the river near downtown. The water caught the city lights, turning them into streaks of gold that shifted with every ripple. Across the bridge, the courthouse stood dark now, the steps empty. For the first time, it didn't feel like a battlefield. It was just a building again. A soft vibration in my coat pocket pulled me back. Another call, this time from Patricia. "The press is asking for a statement," she said. "I can release one on your behalf, or we can decline. What would you suggest?" She hesitated before answering. "Sometimes silence says more." I smiled faintly. "Then let's keep it that way." The following morning, the papers ran their own story anyway. Airwind's disputed estate family rift deepens. They used an old photograph of me from a company event standing beside my grandfather, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. I read the article once, then folded it and set it aside. There was nothing in it I didn't already know. That night, as I sat on the couch, I turned the flash drive over in my hand again. The metal caught the lamplight, small but solid, like it could outlast everything. I plugged it in and replayed my grandfather's message just once more. His voice filled the room, steady, kind, deliberate. "If you're hearing this, it means they've already shown you who they are. Remember who you are, Mara. That's the difference." The screen dimmed to black when it ended, leaving a reflection of my own face where his had been. I sat there a long time, the hum of the city filtering through the window. The silence between us felt alive, the same silence that had carried me through every fire, every accusation, every door slammed in my face. Later, I opened the balcony door. The night air was cool, the city below glowing soft under the streetlights. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace, not triumph, not victory, just the steady rhythm of a world that kept turning. I looked up, catching the faint glimmer of a plane crossing the dark sky, its lights blinking slow and even. Somewhere beyond it, the horizon waited wide and clear. The fight was over, but what came next would be mine to build. When I closed the door and turned off the light, the apartment was quiet again. The kind of quiet my grandfather always said could tell its own story. The kind that let you breathe before the next chapter began. The city had quieted by the time I got home that night. From the balcony, the skyline stretched in soft shades of blue and gold, the hum of traffic muffled by distance. Below, the streetlights flickered against the damp pavement. I stood there for a long time, holding a mug that had gone cold, letting the silence fill the space my family's noise had left behind. It had been 2 weeks since the hearing, 2 weeks since my father's outburst in court and my mother's last letter. The days had been steady documents, finalized accounts, transferred calls with Raymond about trusts and filings. The order of things should have felt like relief, but instead it carried a quiet weight I couldn't shake. I had won, but the victory felt muted, like a song played underwater. Late one evening, as rain traced faint lines down the window, the doorman buzzed to say someone was waiting in the lobby. When I stepped off the elevator, Grant was standing near the desk, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, the collar damp with drizzle. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Mara," he said, his voice low, "I know you don't want to see me. Just give me 5 minutes." I nodded toward the cafe across the street. Inside, the place was nearly empty, just the soft clink of dishes and the smell of burnt espresso. We took a corner booth, the space between us heavy with everything unspoken. He kept his eyes on the table. "Mom and Dad aren't talking to me," he said. "They think I should have done more to convince you, that I failed them." I didn't answer. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "You were right about everything, about the way they treat people, the way they twist things. I just didn't want to believe it." I looked at him then, and for the first time since the will reading, I saw the brother I used to know. The sharp edges were gone. "What do you want from me, Grant?" I asked. "Nothing," he said quickly. "Not money, not a piece of anything. I just want to fix what I can." He reached into his coat and slid an envelope across the table. These are Dad's company files, the ones he kept hidden from Grandpa. The dates match the year he forced Grandpa to sign that first will. I opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies, emails, transaction ledgers, and handwritten notes. My father's signature appeared again and again beside documents marked unauthorized transfer and asset concealment. "Why give this to me?" I asked. "Because you're the only one who can clean it up," he said. "And because it's what Grandpa would have wanted." His voice caught quiet but certain. He believed in you even when the rest of us didn't. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, a cab splashed through a puddle, headlights reflecting off the wet glass. When I looked back, Grant's eyes were tired but clear. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "But I needed you to know I'm done defending them." I nodded slowly. "Then let's make this mean something." He left without another word. I watched through the window as he crossed the street, his figure blurring into the rain. The envelope sat on the table, the edge curling slightly where the paper had absorbed a drop of water. That night I spread the files across my desk, the lamplight catching every signature. Page after page told the same story: years of quiet manipulation, concealed trusts, and siphoned funds. It was more than greed. It was deliberate, methodical, the kind of betrayal Harold had predicted long before his final days. I called Patricia the next morning. She answered on the second ring, her tone sharp but calm. "I've been expecting this," she said after I explained. "Mr. Benton always hinted that your father might have crossed lines outside the will. If this documentation is real, we can initiate an inquiry." "Would that make it public?" I asked. "Yes," she said simply. "There's no other way to clean it completely." I hesitated, staring at the papers scattered across my desk. The names, the numbers, the years, they all traced back to the people who shared my last name. "Then let's move forward," I said finally. By the end of the week, Patricia had filed for a corporate audit. Within days, news spread through the financial press. Benton Holdings under investigation for misappropriation of funds. My phone rang constantly, journalists, old acquaintances, even people from my grandfather's company who hadn't spoken to me in years. I didn't answer any of them. A week later, Raymond called. "You've done something your grandfather couldn't," he said. "You forced the truth into daylight. It's not going to be easy, but this is the beginning of real change." The next few days blurred into a quiet routine of meetings and paperwork. At night, I walked the same river path near downtown, the one that had become my way to breathe between decisions. The city lights shimmered across the water, broken and mended again with every ripple. Somewhere between those reflections, I could still hear Harold's voice reminding me that silence doesn't mean surrender, it means control. 3 weeks after the audit began, I received an email from a corporate investigator confirming the findings. My father's accounts were frozen pending review. My mother's charitable foundation, one that had existed mostly on paper, was under examination as well. The note ended with a request for a formal statement from me as the new trustee of the estate. When I finished reading, I sat back in my chair, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the apartment. I thought of my father standing over the burning check, his face lit by the orange glow. He had said, "Now we're even." But the truth had its own way of balancing things. A few days later, Patricia met me for coffee near the courthouse. She arrived with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's done," she said. "The investigation's gone public. Your father resigned this morning. Your mother withdrew from her charity board." I stirred my coffee slowly. "What about Grant?" "He's been cooperating," she said. That helped. We sat for a while, the low hum of conversation filling the space around us. Finally, Patricia added, "You handled this the way few could have, without noise, without spectacle." "That's how he taught me," I said quietly. When I left the cafe, the sky was pale and clear, the kind of late afternoon light that softens everything it touches. I walked along the courthouse steps where months earlier I'd felt the weight of every eye in the room. Now the marble was cool beneath my hand, and the world felt strangely still. That evening, back at the apartment, I opened the drawer where I'd kept my mother's letter. The edges were crisp, untouched since the day it arrived. I read it once more, her neat handwriting, the cold precision of her sentences. Then I folded it carefully and placed it beside my grandfather's final note, One written to wound, one written to guide. Two sides of the same inheritance. As the light outside faded, I stepped onto the balcony. The air carried the faint scent of rain, again soft and clean. Somewhere below, a violinist was playing near the corner cafe, the notes rising through the street like something untamed. I stood there listening until the song ended and the quiet returned. Tomorrow I would meet with Raymond again to finalize the last of the trust documents. But for that moment, there was nothing left to sign, nothing left to defend, only the sound of the city breathing below me, steady and alive. The storm that began with a burning check had finally burned itself out, but I could still see its glow in the distance, a reminder of where it started and what was waiting beyond the smoke. When the rain returned that week, it came soft and steady, washing the last bits of winter from the city streets. I spent those days tucked between phone calls and paperwork, clearing out what was left of my grandfather's estate. The process felt endless, signatures, transfers, small decisions that all seemed to lead to something larger. Yet every so often I'd find something that stopped me. A letter in his handwriting, an old blueprint, a note scribbled on the back of a photograph. It felt less like paperwork and more like a trail he'd left behind, one step at a time. Raymond called one afternoon with a tone I'd learned to recognize. "You should come by," he said. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." When I arrived, he led me into a quiet conference room with a long oak table and a single folder waiting at the center. Beside it sat a woman with gray-streaked hair pulled neatly into a bun, her coat still damp from the weather. Mara, Raymond said, "This is Evelyn Pierce. She's an investigative journalist, an old friend of your grandfather's." She offered her hand, her grip firm. "He mentioned you often," she said. "Said you were the only one who ever listened without interrupting." I couldn't help but smile. "He taught me to wait until people finished the truth." Evelyn nodded as if she understood exactly what that meant. She opened the folder in front of her, revealing a stack of typed pages, newspaper clippings, and scanned financial records. "Harold asked me to hold on to these in case something happened to him," she said. He was worried that what he found would disappear if left in the wrong hands. The first page was a report linking Benton Holdings to offshore accounts that dated back nearly 20 years. At the top was my father's signature. "He'd been investigating this for months before he passed," Evelyn said. "He didn't just suspect misconduct, he confirmed it." Raymond leaned forward, his expression heavy. "It's worse than we thought," he said quietly. Thomas wasn't just hiding money. He was rerouting company assets through shell organizations, some tied to names that no longer exist on record. I felt my pulse slow. "He did all this while Grandpa was alive." Evelyn nodded. "Right under his nose. Harold uncovered it, but his health started failing before he could bring it to light. That's why he built everything around you. He trusted you to finish it." The room fell silent. The rain against the window softened to a faint whisper. I traced the edge of the paper with my thumb. The ink faded, but clear enough to reveal everything my father had tried to bury. Evelyn closed the folder gently. "You can take these," she said. "But understand, once this surfaces, it won't just end a business, it'll end reputations." I nodded slowly. He knew that. Raymond met my eyes. "So do you." That evening, I walked home through streets shining with puddles. The city lights shimmered across the wet asphalt, and for a moment I could almost see my reflection walking beside me, steady, quiet, and certain. When I reached my building, I didn't turn on the lights. I set the folder on the table and stood over it, watching the papers curl slightly at the edges. My grandfather's handwriting appeared on one of the notes tucked inside. "The truth has its own gravity. Let it fall where it must." The next morning I called Patricia. When she arrived at my apartment, she carried her briefcase like a shield. I handed her the folder without a word. She opened it, scanning each page, her brow furrowing deeper as she went. When she finished, she looked up. "If this goes public, your father will face criminal charges," she said. "This isn't just ethics, it's fraud, wire transfers, asset concealment. They'll come after you for releasing it." "He made that choice long before I did," I said. She closed the folder. "Then I'll contact the district office. They'll decide how to proceed." 2 days later the call came. A grand jury was convening to review the evidence. My father's name appeared in the headlines the next morning, followed by the words "federal inquiry" and "embezzlement." The story spread fast. The same networks that once celebrated the Benton family now filled their broadcasts with images of him leaving his office surrounded by cameras and questions. I didn't watch the interviews. I didn't need to. My phone filled with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Neighbors, distant relatives, old classmates. Some offered sympathy, others, curiosity. I answered none. Late one evening, a knock sounded at my door. When I opened it, my mother stood in the hallway. Her hair was pulled back, her coat still wet from the drizzle outside. She looked older, smaller somehow, as if the years had suddenly caught up to her. "Mara," she said, her voice unsteady. "I didn't know where else to go." I stepped aside without speaking. She entered quietly, her eyes landing on the family photo still on the bookshelf, the one taken years ago in my grandfather's garden. "He's been arrested," she whispered. "Your father?" "They came this morning." I nodded. I heard. She turned to me, her eyes red but dry. "Why would you do this to us?" The question hung in the air, brittle and sharp. I met her gaze. "I didn't do this, Mom." "He did." Her lip trembled, and for a moment I thought she might argue. Instead, she sank into the nearest chair, her hands trembling in her lap. "He always said Harold favored you," she said quietly. "I never believed it until now." "He didn't favor me," I said. "He trusted me to finish what he couldn't." She looked at me, then really looked as if seeing me for the first time in years. "You sound just like him," she said softly. That same calm, that same distance. There was no anger in her voice now, only exhaustion. She stayed for a while longer, staring out the window at the rain that had begun again, heavier this time. When she finally stood, she didn't ask for forgiveness. She just said, "I don't know what happens next," and walked out into the storm. After she left, I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, listening to the rain hit the glass. Somewhere between the thunder and the steady rhythm, I thought I heard my grandfather's voice again, the same quiet conviction that had guided every step so far. They'll destroy what they can't control. Let them. What matters will already be safe. The next morning, I met with Evelyn at her office to hand over a signed release authorizing her to publish the full report. She took it carefully, her eyes steady. "Once this runs, there's no taking it back," she said. "I know," I replied. She studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "He was right about you." That afternoon, her article went live. The Hidden Ledger, How Benton Holdings Fell from Grace. It spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours, the company's board voted to remove my father permanently. Investors withdrew, legal proceedings mounted, and what had once been the symbol of our family's power dissolved in the light of day. By sunset, my phone rang again. This time it was Raymond. "It's over," he said simply. "The company's being restructured under new leadership. Your grandfather's name will be cleared." Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the streets washed clean. The clouds broke apart, revealing a stretch of clear sky edged in gold. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the reflection of the city shimmer across the wet rooftops. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang its sound low and steady. The weight that had followed me for months began to loosen, not with celebration, but with something quieter acceptance. The fire my father started had burned through everything he built. But in its place, there was something my grandfather would have recognized, a clean slate, waiting for what came next. And as the last echo of the bell faded, I realized that for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The week after the article went live, everything moved fast. The story swept across news outlets until it reached every corner of the city, headlines flashing words like fraud, embezzlement, indictment. Overnight, the Benton name shifted from power to scandal. My father's arrest had begun a chain reaction. The company was stripped down, the board replaced, and Harold Benton's estate, his real legacy, was finally being restored to what it should have been all along. Raymond called each morning with updates. "The federal inquiry's expanding," he said one day. "They're looking into multiple accounts now. But your grandfather's holdings are protected under the trust. No one can touch them." His tone carried the same calm confidence Harold once had, and for the first time since this began, I felt the ground under my feet steady again. Grant stayed out of the spotlight, keeping his distance from the family chaos. He texted me once just 2 words, "Thank you." I didn't reply, but I saved the message. There was something final in it, like the closing of a door that didn't need to reopen. On a clear Friday morning, Patricia called with one last update. "It's official," she said. "Your father pleaded guilty to reduced charges. Wire fraud, asset concealment, falsified filings. He's facing 6 years, maybe less, with cooperation." Her voice softened. "It's a just outcome, Mara. This is the end of the fight. The end." The words lingered long after the call ended. That afternoon, I met Raymond for lunch at a small restaurant off Lexington. He handed me a sealed folder heavier than it looked. "Final accounting of the estate," he said, "and a list of the trusts your grandfather instructed us to create after the dust settled." I opened the folder and scanned the names: scholarships, foundations, endowments, all under the Benton name, but guided by new principles: education, sustainability, integrity. "He wanted you to choose which one to start first," Raymond said. His only instruction was simple: start where the silence is the loudest. I smiled faintly. He always did love riddles. When I returned home, I spread the papers across my dining table. The late afternoon light spilled over the pages, touching each line of ink, each promise written into law. Among the documents was a personal letter in my grandfather's hand, sealed with the same wax crest as before. My name was written across it in careful strokes. "If you're reading this," it began, "you've already done what I couldn't. You've seen truth prevail without destroying yourself in the process. What comes next isn't about rebuilding what was lost. It's about building something new. Remember, wealth is noise, but purpose is quiet. Use your silence wisely." I sat there for a long time, tracing the loops of his handwriting. Then I picked up the phone and called Patricia. "I want to start the Education Trust," I said, "the one for first-generation students. We'll name it after him." That night I went through old boxes stored at the back of my closet. Inside one was a photograph I hadn't seen in years, me maybe 10, standing in Harold's workshop holding a small wooden carving he'd made. He was smiling sawdust on his sleeves. Behind us, his motto was etched on a beam above the workbench: "Measure twice, cut once." I ran my thumb over the photo's edge, realizing it wasn't just about carpentry, it was about precision in every choice that mattered. The next week brought an invitation I hadn't expected, a letter from the district office. "You are entitled to deliver a statement at the sentencing hearing of Thomas Bennett. Attendance optional." I stared at the paper for a long while before setting it aside. There was nothing left I needed to say to him, but part of me knew Harold would have wanted me there, not to speak, but to witness. The courthouse was smaller this time, the same stone steps, the same air of restrained order. Inside, reporters murmured quietly as I slipped into the last row. My mother sat near the front, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked fragile, her posture held together by habit more than strength. Grant sat 2 seats away, his head bowed. When they brought my father in, he looked older, thinner, his gray suit hanging loose at the shoulders. For a moment his eyes found mine. There was no anger there, no fight, just recognition and something like surrender. The judge read the charges, the sentence, the terms of restitution. My father nodded through it all, his expression unreadable. When it ended, he turned once more toward us, as if searching for something he couldn't quite name. My mother reached for him, but he didn't look her way. Instead, his gaze lingered on me, just long enough for the silence between us to stretch into something final. Outside, the air felt sharper. Reporters called my name as I walked down the steps, microphones flashing under the sun. One asked Miss Bennett any comment on your father's sentence. I paused, the memory of Harold's words echoing in my mind. "They already said everything when they burned the truth," I said quietly. I just carried what survived. Then I kept walking. In the days that followed, the story began to fade. The papers moved on, the cameras turned elsewhere. The world kept spinning, but in my small corner of it, things began to grow. Patricia helped file the paperwork for the Benton Foundation for Ethical Leadership, its first project, a scholarship for students pursuing business ethics and community advocacy. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the restored downtown office that now bore Harold Benton's name. The walls smelled faintly of new paint and old wood. I stood beside Raymond as he addressed the small crowd of students, donors, and city officials. When he finished, he handed me the microphone. I looked out at the faces before me, young, hopeful, ready. My grandfather built an empire from nothing I began. But the real foundation he left behind wasn't money. It was integrity. Every decision he made came from that truth, and today that truth continues through all of you. The applause was quiet, respectful. As I stepped back, I caught a glimpse of Grant near the back of the room. He lifted his hand in a small, steady wave. I nodded in return. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was something close. After the ceremony, I stayed behind, walking through the halls of the building that had once been Harold's headquarters. His old office had been left untouched, preserved exactly as it was. On his desk sat a single photograph, him and me at that same workbench from years ago. Next to it, an old brass key engraved with the word Trillium. I picked it up and turned it in my hand, remembering the first time he'd given it to me and told me to keep it safe. I finally understood. It wasn't just a key to a vault. It was a key to understanding everything he'd meant by legacy, the quiet, unbreakable kind that can't be burned or bought. Outside, the afternoon sun glinted off the glass windows bright enough to make me squint. The city hummed around me, alive and indifferent, but for the first time it didn't feel like something I needed to fight against. What had begun as a family feud over money had ended with something far deeper, a lesson written not in ink or inheritance, but in the silence that remains after truth has spoken. And as I stepped out into the street, the brass key warm in my palm, I knew that the hardest part wasn't over yet. It was learning how to live in peace after the fire. The following spring, the city felt different. The air was warmer, the lights softer, and everything that once felt heavy had started to lift. The Benton Foundation was officially open, and our first group of scholarship recipients had just been selected. They came from small towns and crowded cities, each with stories of quiet determination that reminded me so much of my grandfather. I watched them file into the conference room that morning, their faces bright with the kind of hope I hadn't seen in years. It struck me that this was what Harold meant by building something that breathes. Raymond stood beside me, his usual calm presence, grounding the moment. "You did it," he said quietly. I smiled. "No," I said. "He did. I just followed the map he left behind." Raymond nodded, though we both knew that following it hadn't been easy. Later that afternoon, I walked through the Foundation's office alone. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the edges of the framed photographs on the wall, images from Harold's life, from mine, from the company before the fall. On the far side of the hall hung a single quote carved into bronze. "Integrity is what remains when the fire is gone." I ran my hand over the words, feeling the texture of each letter. They were his written years ago, on the back of a workshop ledger. When the last of the staff left for the evening, I took the elevator up to the roof. The city stretched wide beneath me, a patchwork of glass and movement, its pulse steady and alive. The wind carried the scent of spring rain, the same scent that had lingered the day the check burned, the day everything began to change. I thought of my father, then sitting somewhere far away, serving the sentence that had cost him everything but truth. There was no satisfaction in it, only peace. Some lessons can't be learned until they break what you built. My mother had written once since the sentencing. Her letter was short, careful, almost tender. She said she hoped I was well, that she'd started volunteering at a local shelter, and that maybe someday we could talk again. I hadn't answered yet, but I kept the letter in the same drawer as Harold's final note. Some silences don't need to be filled right away. Grant had joined one of the Foundation's mentorship programs, guiding students interested in financial law. Watching him from a distance at our events, I saw a quiet humility that had never been there before. When we finally spoke again, it was brief but real. "I'm trying to be better," he said. "You already are," I replied. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something close. As evening settled, I sat on one of the benches facing the skyline. The city lights came on one by one until the horizon glowed gold and white. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small brass key engraved with the word Trillium. The metal had grown warm from being held so often. I turned it over in my palm, remembering how my grandfather's voice had sounded the night he gave it to me, steady, certain, proud. I realized then that the key had never really been about a vault or a fortune. It was a reminder to keep something locked inside that no one could take: dignity, truth, and peace. That was the real inheritance he'd left behind. I closed my hand around the key and looked out at the city that had seen me lose everything and rebuild it again. The noise below faded into something softer, like the steady rhythm of breathing. After all the fire, all the battles, and all the silence, I had finally reached the quiet he'd promised me. If you've ever had to start over after everything you knew burned away, you understand what that quiet means. It isn't empty. It's full of the things you fought to protect. It's proof that you made it through. Thank you for listening to my story. If it reminded you of your own journey of a time you chose truth over comfort, share it. Someone out there might need to hear that it's possible to begin again even after the fire.